probably sixth or seventh time here at Bookends, and we really appreciate you coming back to Bookends in New Jersey, and thank you guys for coming out tonight. You've been all over to the news today, doing a lot of media. We did an event in New York City, so thanks for coming out to talk about Trump's triumph. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I just thought I'd take a minute or two and talk about the book and then take questions for a couple minutes. We decided in October that Trump was going to win, and that it was a historic event, and that writing a book that sort of put it in context would actually be a very useful thing to do. So we began working on it actually about 3 weeks before the election. And our goal was to really cover two things. One was, how did he win? Just as a historic event, and as a pretty improbable historic event. And the other was, what did it mean about America and about where America's going? Because in a sense, there's a movement which has been growing really since 1964 with Goldwater. And if you go back and you look on YouTube, you can pull up A Time for Choosing, which is the speech Reagan gave for Goldwater. And it's still relevant. I mean, it's an amazingly relevant speech today. And that movement has been growing and growing and growing. And in response on the other side, they've been getting more radical, more out of touch, and more destructive. So you've had these two parallel patterns that have been developing now for about almost 60 years. In Trump's case, you can't describe him except as a phenomenon. I mean, here's a guy who comes out of the business world, takes on 16 Republicans, many of whom were very competent. The front runner when it began was Jeb Bush, who had both a brother and a father who'd been president, had the largest amount of money, would have been, any professional would have said he's the probable nominee. And Trump got in his head so deeply about being low energy Jeb that by February, Bush was running around New Hampshire in a jogging outfit to prove how much energy he had, which frankly destroyed his campaign, because in New Hampshire in February, people think you're insane if you're out running around in a jogging outfit. And then having defeated 16 Republicans, he beat Hillary Clinton, who the national establishment knew was going to be the next president. And then he endured the FBI, the Central Intelligence Agency, the major news media, all trying to destroy him. And then he got impeached twice. Then he went through an election in 2020 that was clearly rigged. I'm not saying it was stolen on election day, but the totality of the election was clearly rigged. And then he had to come back. And so here's a guy who'd been impeached twice, starts to come back. There are 4 different efforts to put him in jail. 2 people try to kill him. And he wins. Now, he doesn't just win. He drives the incumbent president out of the race in the early summer, and then pivots and defeats the vice president. So he's the only guy I know who beat 2 major opponents in 1 year. And other than Grover Cleveland in 1892, he's the only person ever to be in the White House, out of the White House, and back in the White House. So Trump can lay some pretty good claim to fame. One of the great mistakes that the left historians were somebody to record was that by denying him re-election, they further radicalized him, and they gave him 4 years to think about it. And so he's actually much more aggressive and much more dedicated to change than he would have been if he'd gotten reelected in 20. It's a great irony if you think about it. And in addition, he built an organization called the American First Policy Institute, which I did some work with. And they had 400 people who had been in the Trump administration, who spent 4 years building what became the entire current program. So they really entered office with enormous capability. I would say, and I've said this directly to the president and his team, last year they won a ticket to the dance. And now the American people are watching them dance. And if they dance well enough, in 26 they'll win another ticket to the dance. And then if they do well enough, in 28 they'll elect a successor. And I think if that happens, Trump will really have been probably the biggest change agent to be in the White House other than Washington and Lincoln. And it's an astonishing achievement. And so we wanted to write the book both to reflect what has happened, to suggest a little bit about what might happen. Because we basically completed the book in January and very early February, when we got our first copies, we stopped and looked at it to see what did we get wrong. Because, you know, this guy's been doing a lot of stuff. The two biggest things we missed is it never occurred to us to describe a Gulf of America. And it didn't occur to us to suggest that Greenland and Canada somehow need to be part of the U.S. Other than those two areas, the book actually is remarkably accurate in forecasting where we are, where we're going. So that's sort of the background for it. I'm very excited by the book. I think it's actually at this moment in time very helpful, and people will find it very useful in understanding better what's going on. So if it's okay, I'll take a couple questions. Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming, and I think you have a brilliant mind, and personally, I think you should have been vice president. But with that being said, what was the process like, and I guess what were your overall thoughts on being vetted for vice president around the time in 2016?
Well, that was in 2016.
Yes.
Well, but part of it's just like paperwork.
Right.
You know, you have to fill out all this stuff, and then you have to sit down and meet with the lawyers that the president sends, or the nominee sends over to check you out and make sure that you're, you know, that there are no surprises that are going to show up in the news media. But I remember Trump was using me. Okay, I don't personally believe he ever thought I was going to be the vice presidential nominee, but he didn't want to just pick Pence, and that would be boring. So he wanted a story. Now I had two events that pretty well guaranteed that I was not going to be the nominee. One was he asked me to come out with him to Cincinnati, where he had about, I don't know, 30,000 people, and he brought me up on stage and he introduced me. And the crowd began chanting Newt. I'm here, Trump's here. He's looking at the crowd. He's looking at me. He's looking at the crowd. He doesn't like them chanting Newt. He's supposed to chant Trump. So I knew at that point I was probably not going to do it. But we finally sat down together just before he picked Pence. And he was going through this, what should I do? And I said, look, you can't possibly pick me. I said, you're a pirate. I'm a pirate. You can't have a two-pirate ticket. There's no normal person that people relate to. I said, Mike is a very solid, very good guy. Regular Republicans can identify with him and talk with him. He'll be a big asset to you, which he was, I think. I mean, up until January 6th, I thought Pence had been a very, very good vice president. And I think that was the right decision. I mean, plus, Trump's a very strong personality. Well, I'm a very strong personality. I mean, you don't want to drop the two of us into one room for 4 years. It would be a constant fighting. We get along very, very well because I come in with an idea and get the hell out of there, frankly. I never try to stay around and become part of the gang because we wouldn't wear well together. We're too strong. But it was fun. It was exciting. I don't know how many of you have seen, it's on YouTube, where Chris Farley comes down to the House Republican Conference and plays me. And I thought did a good job. I had no idea. John Boehner came up with this. He was chairman of the conference. They talked to Farley, who said he'd love to do it. So I'm literally standing there, leading the conference. And Boehner comes over and says, you need to sit down for a minute. And I thought, what? So I went and I sat down. And Farley walks in, carrying a gavel, and takes over. And it was very good for the conference because we worked really hard, and it gave us something to laugh about and to relax and to enjoy. And I thought Chris did a great job. I think probably I'd always liked animals. When I was about 11 years old, I went to see a double feature of 2 African movies that had lots of animals in them. And I thought, you know, I was in Harrisburg at the time, and I thought that Harrisburg ought to have a zoo. And so my grandmother had always told me, you know, you should do your duty as a citizen. I came out of the movie theater, this was late on August afternoon. I came out of the movie theater, and right there, almost as an act of God, there was a sign that pointed down an alleyway and said City Hall. And I stood there at 11 years of age and thought, well, should I just go home like my mother wanted me to? Or should I go to City Hall and ask about a zoo? And my grandmother always said, you should be a good citizen. And this is part of why I end up as a historian, because you could not make this up. So I go down to City Hall, which is an old brick building back then, walk upstairs, there's a receptionist, and I say, I'm here to see about a zoo. And she has no idea what it is. She says, well, I guess that'll be Parks and Recreation. They're on the 2nd floor. So I go in to the Parks and Recreation department, and the lady who is the receptionist and really runs it says, oh, the director's not here today, but his deputy is. Well, his deputy was an old-time civil servant. I go in to see him, and we chat, and he brings out the records. They had a zoo in Wildwood Park before World War II, which they closed when they had rationing during the war. So he shows me all that, and he says, now, your job is to come back next Tuesday to the city council and explain why Harrisburg needs a zoo. He then picked up the phone, called my grandmother, who he had dated 40 years ago. This is the kind of stuff you can't do. And said, I'm sending Newty home, I'm getting him a cab, but he has to come back Tuesday. So Tuesday I show up. They have a typical city council meeting. I'm the last person. The next to last, because I'm 11 years old, the next to last is a couple complaining about garbage collection on their street. Then I get up and I give a pitch for the zoo. So you're putting yourself in the shoes of the Harrisburg Patriot News reporter. It's a really slow August day. You can either write garbage pickup complaint, or you can write cute 11-year-old calls for zoo. Well, guess what you did? About 6 weeks later, my dad, who was serving in Korea at that point, writes my mother and says, keep him out of the newspapers. Which is probably one of the things I have most failed to respond to follow his instruction ever since. But that's how I originally got started with zoos. Yes, sir.
Yes, I heard you on the radio saying that there was an animus among historians against Andrew Jackson, and that failed to produce a good biography till the 1950s. Would Professor Schlesinger's book come under that?
No, that was the breakthrough.
Oh, that was the breakthrough. Oh, okay.
Which I think is 1955.
I think it was 49.
Okay, 49. But no, I'll have to correct what I've been saying.
Oh, that was like the...
But it was literally over 100 years after he left office. Jackson was sort of Trump on steroids. And the establishment hated him. I mean, he was a Westerner, he had been a military person. He once shot somebody from the balcony of the White House. I mean, in general, he was not acceptable to Eastern elites. And literally nobody wrote a positive biography until Schlesinger. I'm going to go check now. If it's 49, I feel really bad. So I thought it was 55.
Sorry.
The Age of Jackson.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the first time he had a positive biography. Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions. I have a 2-parter. Thank you for coming. So I remember a few years ago on your Facebook page you had like a what if a series on your channel.
Mm-hmm.
I had this question. What do you think the post-World War II era would have looked like if perhaps FDR did not have the stroke that killed him?
Hard to say. I think had FDR survived and remained president, he would probably have been slower than Truman to take on Stalin.
Yes.
Although you can't tell, because FDR by the summer of '44 is very sick. And so the guy who's going to Yalta is in fact really a dramatically weaker, less energetic, and less perceptive person. I mean, Roosevelt had historically been very smart and very tough. But towards the end, I think he got much softer. So, and of course, you could, I mean, an equally interesting question is what if Wallace had survived and still been vice president? Because a Wallace presidency would have been radically different than Truman. And what was your second question?
My other question is, in your opinion, what event in the Biden presidency, what error did he commit that do you think caused the dominoes to start falling, where his poll numbers started going down? That what moment do you think his presidency made you think, okay, I think Trump can capitalize this if he runs again in 2024?
I mean, I really think this is oversimplification, but I really think there are four things going on at the same time. One is inflation. I mean, people really were responding to that. The second was a perceived set of radical policies, from transgenderism across the board to open borders, being anti-police, so a whole set of things there. The third was that we looked very weak in foreign policy. His popularity really drops after Afghanistan and never really recovers. And then the fourth is, it was just obvious year after year that this guy is decaying. You know, you could, I mean, it was almost elder abuse. You just had the sense that this guy shouldn't have been there. Excuse me, I'm just checking it. So, anyway, so that's my bad. Yes, sir, then you.
In the back of our church, we have a 99-year-old usher that everybody loves, and they always ask him, "Are you well? Are you well?" So last week he said, "I'm not even medium rare." So that's our new joke going to the cars. Everybody says, "Stay well or stay medium," just like Ronald Reagan, a joke. But looking at Jimmy here at 100 years old, I have to tell you, I wish you good health and to 100 also.
I'll take it.
You have always been the strongest link in the Republican chain. And when they ganged up on you on TV with interviews and everything else you did, you always had the comebacks. My favorite was one time you told the reporter, "Yes, he said that. And you know why? Fact check it. I was there." And it was something that Ronald Reagan had said. I loved it.
I learned a lot from Reagan. I first started studying Reagan in '65, and I started working with him in '74. And he was remarkable. That's it. Yes, sir.
An article, editorial Wall Street Journal, written by a doctor who's a specialist in geriatric medicine. And she claims, and she's filed with the Delaware whatever health agency, that Mrs. Biden is guilty of elder abuse and everybody else involved.
Yeah.
That he didn't know what was going on. What do you think of that? And do you think that makes any sense? Do you think it's going to go anywhere?
No, I doubt if it'll go anywhere, but I think it's right. I mean,
it makes a point, you know.
I mean, I think the breaking point was sometime in '23. I think before that he was slow, but he wasn't embarrassing. But sometime in '23, you can just tell that things are going wrong, and I think she would have served both the country and, frankly, the president better by saying, you know, Joe, we really need to go home.
I will add to that, and my wife said from the beginning, it's his wife that wants him to stay president.
I think that's right. I think that's
my wife, so I showed her the article. I said, here's what the doctor says.
Well, but put yourself in her shoes.
Yeah.
She has Marine One, Air Force One, Secret Service protection, or bicycling in Delaware. Now, that's a pretty big cliff to jump off of, and I don't think she wanted to jump off. I have to say, by the way, Callisto was my wife, and did the ambassador to the Vatican. she went over for the funeral for the Pope. And after the funeral, she ran into Joe and Jill. And Jill was actually sitting on the curb, changing shoes. And Joe, they brought a little chair out, and Joe was kind of sitting in the chair. And she chatted with them. They were very nice to her. I mean, they had a nice little chat, and, you know, and he actually connected her with me, which I thought was a good sign. But clearly, and I tell people all the time, and I'll close with this and then we'll sign books. There is a question about who was covering up and all that. There's a much bigger question about who was exercising power unconstitutionally. And so I tell people, I don't worry as much about Biden. We can all stipulate Biden. I worry about whoever the unknown people were. For my favorite example, in one day after the election in January, Biden's auto pen signs 2,400 commutations. Now, who were those people? How did they get on that list? Who instructed the clerk to actually sign them? I mean, you know, that to me, in terms of the real scandal, is much deeper and more powerful than Biden himself. And I think we owe the country and we owe the future to find out, I mean, who were the real people. And I think you'll find most of them came out of the Obama administration. That Biden really was Obama's third term.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll sign books.